I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd have an affair. My name is Helen, and this is the story of how I almost destroyed everything I held dear. It all started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are always my least favorite day of the week, not quite as depressing as Monday, but still far from the weekend. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, staring at my reflection. At 32, I wasn't old by any means, but I could see the first signs of age creeping in. A few grey hairs here, a hint of crow's feet there. I sighed, wondering when I'd started feeling so tired. "Brian?" I called out, my voice echoing through our too-quiet house. "Are you ready? We're going to be late." No response. Of course. I found my husband in his home office, hunched over his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. He barely looked up when I entered the room. "Brian, we need to leave in 5 minutes if we're going to drop the kids off and make it to work on time." He grunted something that might have been acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving the screen. I stood there for a moment, feeling invisible. This had become our new normal ever since Brian's promotion 6 months ago. He'd always been driven, but this new position had consumed him entirely. "Brian," I said, a little louder this time. "Did you hear me?" He finally looked up, blinking as if he'd just woken from a deep sleep. "Sorry, what?" "Oh, right. Yeah, I'll be ready in a minute." I wanted to say more. I wanted to shake him, to scream, to do anything to make him really see me. Instead, I just nodded and left the room. What was the point? He'd just apologize, promise to do better, and then nothing would change. It never did. The drive to school was tense. Our kids, Emma and Liam, picked up on the atmosphere, staying uncharacteristically quiet in the backseat. Brian drove, one hand on the wheel, the other constantly checking his phone for emails. I stared out the window, watching the familiar neighborhood blur past, feeling like a stranger in my own life. After dropping the kids off, we headed to our respective offices. We both worked for the same large corporation, though different departments. As we pulled into the parking lot, I turned to Brian. "Hey," I said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "Maybe we could grab lunch together today. It's been a while since we've done that." Brian glanced at me, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I'd love to, Helen, but I've got a big presentation this afternoon. I'll probably just eat at my desk while I prepare." I pulled my hand back, trying to hide my disappointment. "Right, of course. No problem. Good luck with the presentation." He leaned over and gave me a quick peck on the cheek. "Thanks, honey. I'll try to be home for dinner, okay?" I nodded, knowing full well that try usually meant he'd be home long after the kids were in bed. As I watched him stride into the building, his phone ready in hand, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. When had we become like this? When had we stopped being partners and started being two people who just happened to share a house and a last name? With a heavy sigh, I gathered my things and headed into the office. Little did I know, my world was about to be turned upside down. As I walked through the doors of Hartwell and Associates, I was greeted by the usual buzz of activity. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the hum of conversation. It was also familiar, yet today it felt somewhat hollow. I made my way to my desk, nodding hello to a few coworkers, but not really in the mood for small talk. I just settled in when my computer pinged with a new email. It was from HR, announcing the arrival of our new department head. Curious, I opened it, skimming through the usual corporate jargon until I reached the important part. "Please join us in welcoming Mr. Alexander Reed as the new head of marketing. Mr. Reed comes to us with an impressive track record. I vaguely remembered hearing about the previous department head's retirement, but I hadn't paid much attention to the news of his replacement. Now, as I read through Mr. Reed's credentials, I felt a small spark of interest. Maybe some new blood was exactly what this place needed. As if on cue, a hush fell over the office. I looked up to see a man I didn't recognize walking through the department, flanked by two of the company's executives. He was tall with salt and pepper hair and a confident stride that immediately commanded attention. This had to be Alexander Reed. As they passed by my desk, Mr. Reed's eyes met mine for a brief moment. He smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. I found myself smiling back before I'd even realized what I was doing. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I'm looking forward to getting to know each and every one of you. Let's do great things together." There was something about his presence that seemed to energize the entire office. As he disappeared into his new office, the buzz of conversation grew louder, everyone discussing the new boss. "Did you see him?" whispered Sarah, my cubicle neighbor. "He's got that silver fox thing going on." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help chuckling. "Come on, Sarah, he's our boss now." "Doesn't mean I can't appreciate the view," she said with a wink before turning back to her computer. I shook my head, amused by Sarah's antics, and tried to focus on my work. But throughout the morning, I found my gaze drifting towards Mr. Reed's office more often than I cared to admit. There was something about him that intrigued me, and it wasn't just his good looks. He exuded a kind of energy, a charisma that I hadn't realized I'd been missing in my life. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from Brian. "Presentation moved up. Working through lunch. Sorry." I stared at the message, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. I didn't even bother replying. What was the point? Just then, a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up to find Mr. Reed standing there, that warm smile on his face again. "Helen, right?" he said, extending his hand. "I'm Alex Reed. I was hoping you might have a moment to chat about the Johnson account. I've been told you're the one to talk to." I blinked, surprised that he knew my name, let alone my work on the account. "Of course, Mr. Reed. I'd be happy to." "Please call me Alex," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I was actually about to grab some lunch. Care to join me? We can discuss the account over a meal." For a moment, I hesitated. I glanced at my phone, Brian's message still glowing on the screen. Then I looked back at Alex, at his open, friendly expression, at the way he was actually looking at me, seeing me. "You know what? That sounds great," I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. "I'd love to." As we walked out of the office together, I felt a small thrill run through me. It had been so long since anyone had shown genuine interest in me or my work. I told myself it was just professional excitement, nothing more. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The loneliness, the neglect I'd been feeling, it all seemed to recede in Alex's presence. We ended up at a small bistro near the office, the kind of place I used to dream of Brian taking me for our anniversary. Alex held the door open for me, his hand briefly touching the small of my back as I passed. It was such a small gesture, but it sent a jolt through me that I hadn't felt in years. "So, Helen," Alex said as we settled into our seats, "tell me about yourself. How long have you been with the company?" I found myself opening up to him, telling him not just about my work, but about my life outside the office too. He was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and seeming genuinely interested in my answers. Before I knew it, an hour had passed, and we'd barely touched on the Johnson account. "Oh God," I said, glancing at my watch. "I'm so sorry, Alex. We were supposed to be discussing work, and here I am, rambling on about my life." He reached across the table, his hand briefly touching mine. "Don't apologize, Helen. I enjoyed every minute of it. It's important to me to know the people I work with, not just their job titles." I felt a warmth spreading through me at his words, at his touch. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel seen. As we walked back to the office, Alex said, "You know, Helen, I have a feeling we're going to work very well together. I'm looking forward to it." I smiled up at him, a genuine full smile that I realized I hadn't used in far too long. "Me too, Alex. Me too." That night, as I lay in bed next to Brian, he was already fast asleep, his back turned to me, I couldn't stop thinking about my lunch with Alex. The way he listened, the way he looked at me, it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself it was just the excitement of a new boss, of potential changes at work, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and I was dangerously close to falling. The next few weeks passed in a blur. At home, things remained much the same. Brian was as distant as ever, buried in his work, and barely present even when he was physically there. The kids were starting to notice, especially Emma. She'd ask me why Daddy was always so busy, why he missed the soccer games, why he didn't laugh as much anymore. Each question was like a knife to my heart. But at work, everything had changed. Alex had brought a new energy to the department, and I found myself looking forward to going to the office each day. He'd often stop by my desk, asking for my input on projects or just to chat. Sometimes he'd bring me coffee, remembering exactly how I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, he'd say with a wink as he set the cup down. Can't have my star employee running on empty. Each small gesture, each moment of attention, felt like water to a woman dying of thirst. I knew it was dangerous, knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't help myself. The contrast between Alex's warmth and Brian's coldness was stark, and I found myself drawn more and more to the former. One evening, about a month after Alex had started, I was working late on a big proposal. The office was nearly empty, most people having gone home hours ago. I was so focused on my work that I didn't hear anyone approach until a voice startled me. "Helen, what are you still doing here?" I looked up to see Alex standing there, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked different, more relaxed, more approachable, more handsome. A traitorous part of my mind whispered. "Oh, hi, Alex," I said, trying to ignore the way my heart had started racing. "Just finishing up the Miller proposal. It's due tomorrow, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." He smiled, that warm smile that always made me feel like I was the only person in the room. "That's what I admire about you, Helen. Your dedication. But you know, all work and no play." I laughed, a bit nervously. "Well, I'm almost done. Just a few more tweaks, and I'll head home." Alex leaned against my desk, his hip just inches from my hand. "How about this?" he said, his voice lowering slightly. "You finish up here, and then let me buy you a drink to celebrate your hard work." I froze, my mind racing. A drink? With Alex? Alone? It was everything I'd been secretly wanting and everything I knew I should avoid. "I don't know, Alex," I stammered. "It's getting late, and Brian." "Come on, Helen," he said softly. "One drink. You deserve it. And I promise I'll have you home at a reasonable hour." I looked up at him, at those kind eyes that saw me in a way Brian hadn't in years. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "One drink." Alex's smile widened. "Great. I know just the place." As we left the office together, I felt a mix of excitement and guilt churning in my stomach. It's just a drink with my boss, I told myself. Nothing more. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The bar Alex took me to was small and intimate, tucked away on a side street I'd never noticed before. Low lighting, soft jazz playing in the background, and cozy booths that offered privacy. It was the kind of place that screamed date night, not casual drink with the boss. We settled into a booth in the corner, and Alex ordered us both old-fashioneds without even asking what I wanted. Somehow, he'd known it was my favorite drink. "How did you know?" I asked, taking a sip and savoring the smooth burn of the whiskey. He smiled that disarming smile of his. "I pay attention, Helen. It's my job to know my employees." "Is that what this is?" I found myself asking, emboldened by the alcohol and the intimate setting. "Part of your job?" Alex's expression softened. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The touch sent electricity through my body. "No, Helen," he said quietly. "This is not part of my job. This is something else entirely." I knew I should pull my hand away. I knew I should make an excuse and leave, but I didn't. Instead, I turned my hand over, our fingers intertwining. "Tell me about your husband," Alex said suddenly, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I blinked, surprised by the abrupt change of subject. "Brian, what about him? Is he good to you, Helen? Does he appreciate you? Does he see you the way you deserve to be seen?" The questions hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought about Brian, about our cold, silent house, about the distance that had grown between us. He's busy," I said lamely. "His job, it takes up a lot of his time." Alex's eyes never left mine. "That's not what I asked, Helen. Does he make you happy?" I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I don't know anymore," I whispered. In one smooth motion, Alex was out of his seat and sliding in next to me. His arm went around my shoulders, pulling me close. I knew I should resist, but instead, I found myself leaning into him, breathing in his cologne. "You deserve to be happy, Helen," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "You deserve to be cherished, to be desired, to be seen." I looked up at him, my vision blurry with unshed tears. "Alex, And then he was kissing me. His lips were soft but insistent, his hand cupping my face. For a moment, I was too shocked to respond. But then, God help me, I kissed him back. All the loneliness, all the neglect, all the pent-up desire I'd been suppressing, it all came pouring out in that kiss. When we finally broke apart, We were both breathing heavily. Reality came crashing back, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. "Oh God," I said, pulling away from him. "Oh God, what have I done?" "Helen, it's okay," Alex said, reaching for me again. "It's okay to want this, to want to be happy." I shook my head, grabbing my purse and stumbling out of the booth. "No, it's not okay. I'm married. I have kids. I have to go." I practically ran out of the bar, ignoring Alex calling my name. The cool night air hit me like a slap, and I realized I was crying. What had I done? How could I have let this happen? I fumbled for my phone, intending to call a cab, when I saw I had 3 missed calls from Brian. My heart sank. I listened to the voicemail with shaking hands. "Helen, where are you? The kids are asking for you. Call me back." The guilt intensified. Not only had I kissed another man, but I'd completely lost track of time. It was nearly 10 p.m. I never stayed out this late without telling Brian. I called a cab and spent the entire ride home in a state of panic. What was I going to tell Brian? How would I face him, look him in the eye? I fumbled with my keys at the front door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. When I finally stumbled inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found Brian in the living room, sitting in his armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I was working late, lost track of time. "I'm so sorry, Brian." He stared at me for a long moment, and I felt like he could see right through me, could see the guilt written all over my face. "You smell like alcohol," he said finally. My heart dropped. I had a drink with some coworkers after we finished the project. To celebrate. Brian stood up slowly, setting his glass down. "Funny. I called the office around 8. They said you'd left already." I felt the blood drain from my face. I went out after. I should have called. "I'm sorry, Brian. It won't happen again." He moved closer to me, his eyes searching my face. For a moment, I thought he was going to call me out, to demand the truth. But then he just sighed, his shoulders slumping. "The kids were upset you weren't here for bedtime," he said. "Try to be home earlier tomorrow, okay?" And with that, he brushed past me and headed upstairs. I stood there in the living room, feeling like the worst person in the world. Not only had I betrayed my husband, but I'd let down my children too. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying the kiss with Alex over and over in my mind. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the memory of how alive I felt in that moment. How seen, how wanted. It had been so long since I had felt that way. The next morning, I woke up early and made a big breakfast for the family, pancakes, eggs, the works. It was a pitiful attempt at assuaging my guilt, but it was all I could think to do. Emma looked at me suspiciously as I set a plate of heart-shaped pancakes in front of her. "Are you okay, Mom?" "You're acting weird." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to do something nice for my family." Brian came down last, already dressed for work. He raised an eyebrow at the spread, but didn't say anything. As he grabbed his coffee to go, I reached out and touched his arm. "Hey," I said softly. "Maybe we could have dinner together tonight? Just the two of us." He looked surprised, then checked his watch. "I'll try, Helen. But I've got a big meeting this afternoon. It might run late." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "Okay, just let me know." He gave me a distracted nod and kissed my cheek before heading out. As the door closed behind him, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Even when I was trying, it felt like we were speaking different languages. Work that day was torture. Every time I saw Alex, my stomach did flips. He tried to catch my eye several times, but I studiously avoided him. I couldn't deal with this, not now. Not when everything in my life felt like it was balancing on a knife's edge. But avoidance, it turned out, wasn't an option. Around lunchtime, my computer pinged with a new email. "Helen, we need to talk. My office, 1 p.m. Alex." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I knew I should ignore it, should make up an excuse. But a part of me, a part I was trying desperately to ignore, wanted to see him again. At 1 p.m. sharp, I found myself outside Alex's office. I took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," his voice called from inside. I entered, closing the door behind me. Alex was standing by the window, his back to me. When he turned, the look in his eyes made my breath catch. "Helen," he said softly, "about last night. It was a mistake," I blurted out. "It can't happen again. I'm married, Alex. I have children." He moved closer to me, and it took everything I had not to step back. Was it really a mistake, Helen? Because it didn't feel like one to me. I shook my head, fighting back tears. It doesn't matter how it felt. It was wrong. Alex reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. I knew I should pull away, but I couldn't make myself move. What's wrong is denying yourself happiness, Helen. I see you. I see how lonely you are, how unfulfilled. You deserve more than that. His words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. I was lonely. I was unfulfilled. And standing here, with Alex looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world, I felt more alive than I had in years. "I can't," I whispered even as I leaned into his touch. "I make vows, Alex." "Vows work both ways," he said, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "As your husband kept his? To cherish you? To put you first?" I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. "It's not that simple." "It can be," Alex murmured, and then he was kissing me again. This time, I didn't pull away. This time, I let myself melt into him, let myself feel everything I'd been denying for so long. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot about everything else. The guilt, the fear, my marriage. It all faded away until there was nothing but Alex and the way he made me feel. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. Alex rested his forehead against mine, his hands on my waist. "Tell me you don't want this," he said softly. "Tell me, and I'll never bring it up again." I knew what I should say. I knew what a good wife, a good mother would say. But standing there, in Alex's arms, I couldn't bring myself to lie. "I can't tell you that," I whispered. Alex's smile was like the sun coming out. He kissed me again, softer this time, full of promise. "Then let me make you happy, Helen. Let me give you what you deserve." As I left his office a few minutes later, straightening my clothes and trying to look normal, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I knew that if I took one more step, there would be no going back. My life as I knew it would be over. But as I sat back down at my desk, my lips still tingling from Alex's kisses, I realized something that terrified me. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. By day, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy at home and at work. I made breakfast for the kids, attended their school events, and tried to engage Brian in conversation when he was actually home. But inside I was a mess of guilt, excitement, and fear. Alex and I settled into a dangerous routine. Stolen moments in his office, lingering touches as we passed in the hallway, late nights working, that were really spent in each other's arms. Each time, I told myself it would be the last. Each time, I found myself going back for more. The affair, if that's what it was, remained emotional rather than physical for those first few weeks. We kissed, we held each other, but we didn't cross that final line. I think we both knew that once we did, there would be no turning back. One night, about a month after that first kiss in the bar, I was home alone. Brian was on a business trip, and the kids were at a sleepover. I was curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, trying to distract myself with a book, but unable to focus on the words. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Alex. "Thinking of you. Wish you were here." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed back, "Where's here?" His response came almost immediately. "My place, 1542 Elm Street, App 3B. Come over." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at those words. This was it, the point of no return. If I went to his apartment, I knew exactly what would happen. There would be no more pretending, no more excuses. With shaking hands, I typed my response. On my way. The drive to Alex's apartment was a blur. My mind was racing, alternating between excitement and gut-wrenching guilt. I almost turned around half a dozen times, but something kept me going. The need to feel wanted, to feel alive. It was stronger than my guilt, stronger than my fear. When I knocked on his door, my heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. Alex opened the door, and the look in his eyes took my breath away. Without a word, he pulled me inside and into his arms. What followed was a night of passion unlike anything I'd experienced before. Alex worshipped my body in a way Brian hadn't in years, if ever. He made me feel beautiful, desirable, cherished. For those hours, wrapped in his arms, I forgot about everything else. My guilt, my marriage, my life outside those four walls. It all faded away until there was nothing but Alex and the way he made me feel. Afterwards, as we lay tangled in his sheets, reality began to creep back in. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Hey," Alex said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "What's wrong?" I shook my head, unable to put into words the storm of emotions I was feeling. "I don't know how to do this, Alex. I don't know how to be this person." He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You're not doing anything wrong, Helen. You're just finally putting yourself first." That was I. As I drifted off to sleep in Alex's arms, that question echoed in my mind. Was this really about putting myself first, or was I just being selfish? And more importantly, how long could I keep living this double life before everything came crashing down? The answer, as it turned out, came sooner than I expected. Weeks passed, and I found myself deeper and deeper in my affair with Alex. The guilt was always there, a constant weight in the pit of my stomach. But it was overshadowed by the excitement, the passion, the feeling of being truly seen and appreciated. At home, things with Brian remained distant. He was working longer hours than ever, and when he was home, he was distracted and withdrawn. I told myself that this justified my actions, that if he had been a better husband, I wouldn't have strayed. But deep down, I knew that was just an excuse. The kids, especially Emma, were starting to notice the tension in the house. One night, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Mom, are you and Dad going to get divorced?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course not, sweetheart." "What makes you think that?" She shrugged, picking at a loose thread on her blanket. "You guys never talk anymore. And you're always sad." I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "Oh, honey, grown-up relationships are complicated sometimes. But your dad and I love you and Liam very much. That's never going to change, okay?" She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. As I left her room, I felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over me. What was I doing to my family? The next day at work, I was distracted and on edge. Alex noticed, of course. He always noticed everything about me. "Hey," he said softly, coming up to my desk. "You okay? You seem upset." I glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "Emma asked me last night if Brian and I are getting divorced," I whispered. Alex's expression softened. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that could pass as friendly to anyone watching, but I knew better. "I'm sorry, Helen. That must have been hard." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Alex. The lying, the sneaking around, it's killing me." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Why did you come over tonight? We can talk about it properly." I knew I should say no. I knew I should go home, trying to repair things with Brian. But the thought of being in Alex's arms, of feeling safe and wanted, was too tempting to resist. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll be there around 8. That evening, I told Brian I had to work late. Another lie to add to the growing pile. He barely looked up from his laptop as I left, just grunted in acknowledgement. At Alex's apartment, I found myself pouring out everything I'd been feeling. The guilt, the fear, the conflict between my desires and my responsibilities. Alex listened patiently, holding me close on his couch. "Helen," he said when I'd finally run out of words, "I love you. You know that, right?" I froze. We'd never said those words before. I looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I love you," he repeated, "and I think you love me too. So why are we still pretending this is just an affair? Why don't we make this real?" "Alex," I breathed. "What are you saying?" He took my hands in his gaze intense. "Leave him, Helen. Leave Brian. Be with me. For real." I felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Leave Brian. In my marriage? The thought was terrifying. And yet, a part of me was exhilarated by the idea. "I don't know," I stammered. "The kids. We'll figure it out," Alex said earnestly. "I'll help you through every step. We can be a family, Helen. You, me, the kids. I'll love them like my own." The picture he was painting was seductive. A life with Alex, full of love and passion and understanding. No more lying, no more sneaking around. But could I really do it? Could I really blow up my entire life? I need time to think, I said finally. It's a big decision, Alex. He nodded, pulling me close and pressing a kiss to my forehead. Of course, take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, Helen. Whatever you decide, I'm here. As I left his apartment that night, my mind was reeling. I had a choice to make, and it felt like the biggest decision of my life. Stay with Brian, trying to repair our broken marriage, keep our family intact. Or even for Alex, start a new life, risk everything for a chance of true happiness. I didn't sleep at all that night, tossing and turning, as I weighed my options. By morning, I still didn't have an answer, but I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. I had to make a decision one way or the other. Little did I know, fate was about to make that decision for me in the most unexpected and devastating way possible. The annual company party was always a big event, but this year it felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was just my own guilt and anxiety coloring everything, but the atmosphere felt charged, like a storm about to break. I arrived with Brian, both of us dressed up for the occasion. He looked handsome in his suit, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the early days of our marriage, when just the sight of him would make my heart race. Now, all I felt was a mixture of guilt and resignation. "You look beautiful," Brian said as we entered the hotel ballroom where the party was being held. It was the first compliment he'd given me in months, and it caught me off guard. "Thank you," I replied, managing a small smile. "You look great too." For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this night could be a turning point for us. Maybe we could reconnect, find our way back to each other. But then I saw Alex across the room, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored tuxedo, and all thoughts of reconciliation flew out of my head. Our eyes met, and I felt that familiar jolt of electricity. He gave me a small, secret smile, and I had to look away before I gave us both away. The evening progressed, and I found myself constantly torn between my husband and my lover. I tried to divide my attention equally, dancing with Brian, chatting with coworkers, all while stealing glances at Alex whenever I could. It was exhausting, this double life, and I felt like I was barely holding it together. Things came to a head about halfway through the night. I was at the bar, getting a drink, when I felt a presence behind me. I knew without turning that it was Alex. "You look stunning tonight," he murmured, his breath warm on my ear. I shivered, fighting the urge to lean back into him. "Alex, please. Not here. Not now." He chuckled softly, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "I can't help it, Helen. You're irresistible." I turned to face him, intending to tell him to back off, to remind him that my husband was just across the room. But the look in his eyes made the words die in my throat. There was such longing, such desire there that I felt my resolve weakening. "Dance with me," Alex said, holding out his hand. It wasn't really a question. I knew I should say no. I knew Brian was watching, that people would talk. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. I took his hand and let him lead me to the dance floor. As we swayed to the music, Alex pulled me closer than was strictly appropriate for coworkers. His hand on my lower back burned through the thin fabric of my dress, and I could feel the solid warmth of his chest against mine. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" he asked quietly, his lips close to my ear. I nodded, my throat tight. "I have. But Alex, it's not that simple. My kids would adjust," he finished for me. "Kids are resilient, Helen, and they deserve to see their mother happy." Before I could respond, I felt a tap on my shoulder. My heart sank as I turned to see Brian standing there, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing anger. "Mind if I cut in?" he asked, his voice tight. Alex stepped back smoothly, ever the picture of professionalism. "Of course not. Helen, thank you for the dance." As he walked away, I could feel the tension radiating off Brian. He pulled me into his arms perhaps a bit more roughly than necessary, his movements stiff as we began to dance. "What was that about?" he asked, his voice low. I tried to keep my tone casual. "Just a dance with the boss, Brian. It's a party." He scoffed. "A dance? Helen, he was practically glued to you. And the way he was looking at you." You're imagining things, I said, but even to my own ears, the denial sounded weak. Brian's grip on my waist tightened. Am I? Because from where I was standing, it looked like my wife was getting awfully cozy with her boss. I pulled away from him, anger flaring up to mask my guilt. "Don't be ridiculous, Brian. You're making a scene." But Brian wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on something over my shoulder, and when I turned to look, my blood ran cold. Alex was watching us, a slight smirk on his face. And then, to my horror, he raised his glass in a mocking toast to Brian. It all happened so fast after that. One moment, Brian and I were on the dance floor. The next, he was striding across the room towards Alex, his fists clenched at his sides. "Brian, don't." I called after him, but it was too late. He reached Alex and without a word swung his fist. It connected with Alex's jaw with a sickening crack, sending him stumbling backwards. The room fell silent, everyone turning to stare at the unfolding drama. Alex recovered quickly, wiping a trickle of blood from his split lip. "Mr. Cooper," he said, his voice cold, "I suggest you calm down before you do something you'll regret." But Brian was beyond reason. Years of neglect, of buried resentment, seemed to be pouring out of him. "You smug bastard," he snarled. "You think you can just take whatever you want, don't you?" And then he was on Alex again, raining blows down on him. I watched in horror as they grappled, knocking over tables and sending glasses shattering to the floor. Security was rushing over, but they seemed to be moving in slow motion. "Stop it," I screamed, my voice barely audible over the chaos. "Brian, please." It took 3 security guards to pull Brian off Alex. By the time they managed it, Alex's face was a mess of blood and already forming bruises. Brian didn't look much better, his knuckles split and his suit torn. As security escorted Brian out, he looked back at me. The pain and betrayal in his eyes cut me to the core. In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. There would be no going back from this. The ride home was silent. Brian stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I couldn't stop shaking, the events of the night playing over and over in my head. When we got home, Brian went straight to the guest room without a word. I heard the door slam, and then silence. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that closed door, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Brian had left early, probably to avoid seeing me. The kids were at school, blissfully unaware of how their parents' lives had imploded the night before. I called in sick to work, unable to face the gossip and stares that I knew would be waiting for me. Around midday, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "We need to talk. Come to my place when you can." I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to run to him, to let him hold me and tell me everything would be okay. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, knew that this had gone too far. In the end, I didn't reply to Alex's message. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and started writing. To Brian, to my children, to myself. Trying to make sense of how I'd let things get so out of control. Trying to find a way forward. When Brian came home that evening, I was waiting for him. He looked tired, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," I said softly. He nodded, sinking into a chair across from me. "Yes, we do." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I told him everything. About the affair with Alex, about how lonely and neglected I'd felt, about my fears for our marriage. Brian listened silently, his face a mask of pain and anger. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "I failed you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got so caught up in my work, in providing for our family, that I forgot to actually be present in it. I'm so sorry, Helen." His words broke something in me, and suddenly I was sobbing. Brian moved to my side, wrapping his arms around me, and we cried together. For our broken marriage, for the pain we'd caused each other, for the uncertain future ahead. "What do we do now?" I asked when we both calmed down. Brian took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I do know that I love you, Helen. I want to try to fix this, if you're willing." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. And I saw the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who'd been buried under stress and work and the daily grind of life. "I want that too," I said softly. We both knew it wouldn't be easy. There was so much hurt to work through, so much trust to rebuild. But as we sat there, holding each other in our kitchen, I felt a glimmer of hope. The next day, I went to see Alex. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I knew it was necessary. His face was still bruised from the fight, a stark reminder of the chaos we caused. "It's over," I told him, my voice firm despite the pain in my heart. "I'm sorry, Alex, but I can't do this anymore. I'm going to try to save my marriage." He didn't take it well. He pleaded, he argued, he even threatened to make my life difficult at work. But in the end, he saw the resolve in my eyes and knew it was futile. "I hope you know what you're doing, Helen," he said as I left. "I really do love you." "I know," I replied softly, "but sometimes love isn't enough." The months that followed were difficult. Brian and I started couples therapy, slowly working through our issues. There were good days and bad days, times when I wondered if we were making a mistake in trying to stay together. I took a leave of absence from work, needing time away from the gossip and the constant reminders of my affair. When I eventually returned, it was to a different department, away from Alex. Slowly, painfully, Brian and I began to rebuild our relationship. We started having regular date nights, making time for each other even when work was crazy. We learned to communicate better, to voice our needs and fears instead of letting resentment build. It wasn't easy. There were times when the trust issues flared up, when one of us would withdraw and the old patterns would threaten to reassert themselves. But we kept working at it, kept choosing each other every day. And gradually, things began to improve. We laughed together again, really laughed. We started making plans for the future. We rediscovered the spark that had brought us together in the first place. One night, about a year after that fateful company party, Brian and I were curled up on the couch, watching a movie with the kids. Emma was leaning against me, half asleep, while Lion was sprawled on the floor, completely engrossed in the film. Brian caught my eye over Emma's head and smiled, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. And in that moment, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. This was where I belonged. This was what I had almost thrown away. I'm not naive enough to think that our problems are all solved. Marriage, I've learned, is a constant work in progress. There will always be challenges, always be times when it's easier to withdraw than to reach out. But I also know now that those challenges are worth facing together. That the love we share, the family we've built, is worth fighting for. Worth choosing every single day. As for Alex, I heard he eventually left the company. Sometimes I think about him, wonder what might have been if I'd made a different choice. But those thoughts are fleeting, because when I look at my husband and my children, I know I made the right decision. I almost lost everything chasing a fantasy of passion and excitement. But in the end, I rediscovered something far more valuable, the deep, abiding love of a partnership built on years of shared experiences, of growing together through good times and bad. It's not always easy, it's not always exciting, but it's real and it's ours. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any affair could ever offer.